Good evening. I'd like to call our regular council meeting for Monday, March 28th to order at 6 p.m. I'm Mayor Cliff McNeil-Smith and council members participating from the chamber this evening. To my left, Councillor Peter Wainwright. To my right, Councillor Barbara Fallett and Councillor Scott Garnett. Our three council colleagues are joining us, and you can see them on Zoom. Good evening to Councillor Sarah Duncan, Councillor Terry O'Keefe, and Councillor Chad Rentoul. Good evening to staff in attendance in the chamber, and also will be participating via Zoom, and we'll introduce them as they speak this evening. And good evening to members of the public in the gallery in the chamber, and to those who may be watching the live web stream or watching a recording of our meeting at a later date. Just a note to council colleagues, particularly in the chamber, that we have had some feedback from members of the public or watching the live webcast, and we would just ask that we be conscious of our speaking volume and using the microphone such that it can be recorded, or that folks watching the live webcast can hear us clearly as we conduct our business. I'd like to acknowledge with respect that we are meeting this evening in the territory of the Wasanich Nation. We express our gratitude to the Wasanich people for their stewardship of these lands for millennia, and that we continue to look to build our relationship, government to government, community to community, with the Wasanich people in our community affairs. I'll turn to approval of the agenda, and there are some changes since the agenda was published on our website last Thursday. We have some additional correspondence. We have two items of correspondence under 13A. The Mary Windspears liquor license application. We have 11 additional pieces of correspondence regarding item 13B, which is the Beacon Brewing liquor license application, and we have one letter of correspondence regarding item 12B. Recommendation 1 is, and that is regarding Pooch Parlour's applications, which are on the agenda. And so with those additions, I will look to for a motion to approve as amended.
I'll move the agenda be approved as amended.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? I see all in favor. Motion carries. Thank you. I'll turn to public participation. Technically, we have 3 opportunities for members of the public to participate this evening. We have no one registered to speak to council via Zoom, but I will open it up to members of the public in the chamber in just a moment. We have our general public participation period, which we'll start with in a moment, and members of the public can speak to any item on the agenda or municipal business. And then, as per our liquor license application procedures, we do have special public participation periods for those respective license applications, and so we'll have those 2 tonight. But I'll begin with public participation and invite any speakers to come forward. You would have the microphone for 4 minutes, and we would ask that you give us your name and address before addressing council. So I'll call for a first time if anyone wishes to address council. There is, yeah, there is the button there for the microphone.
I'm speaking on item 12. This is the Pooch. This is the opportunity to speak to that issue?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. 2545 Oakville Avenue. I'm speaking on this item, which is on the agenda 12 today. The March 21st staff report recommended in the strongest possible terms that these applications be denied because personal service businesses such as Pooch Parlour are not permitted in this location under both the OCP and the zoning for that area. I fully support this recommendation. It's unfortunate that the owner didn't do research before she moved and made this decision, and the landlord also should have known what the zoning was for his business, his area. Town staff could have explained the policies and guided them through the process. Notwithstanding the arguments in the staff report to deny this request, there's clearly a large measure of support by some committee members to find a solution at the committee meeting. The committee discussion focused initially on the merits and feasibilities of providing short-term relief through an OCP amendment and a commercial temporary use permit. Later in the discussion, a second option was put forward to amend both the OCP and the zoning bylaw to permit all types of personal service establishments in the M1 zone. I have real concerns about the expansion to include all these kinds of establishments. It opens the door to a range of businesses, barbers, hairdressers, manicurists, to name a few, who can move into the area. Sydney's industrial land is short in supply. The town's long-standing approach has been to strengthen the industrial land base by excluding businesses that are not industrial in nature. Once this land is lost to non-industrial uses, it's lost forever. This approach is clearly set out in the OCP and in the draft of the new OCP that's now under review. The OCP provides clarity and certainty on how land use and development will be managed and how the town will grow as a community over the next 10 to 15 years. It reflects what we care about as a community, and its policies and guidelines describe how we will work to achieve these objectives. It's the roadmap for moving forward for our community. The OCP is not a document to be changed simply to fix a problem caused by someone who did not follow the rules, who made a mistake. A one-off amendment of this nature sends the signal that the OCP is really not that important and can be altered at will. As noted above, it could likely lead to other requests for one-off amendments to address this or other issues, all of which serve to erode the OCP's effectiveness in delivering the community's vision. So that's basically what I wanted to say today, and I really believe that the request should be denied. It won't be an easy choice for council, but I think it's the right choice in these circumstances. Alternatively, if a council still feels compelled to provide some support, say through a commercial temporary use permit for this business at this specific location for a limited period of time, this approach will work, but I would not like to see an OCP amendment made as part of this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gelinas. I'll call for a second time if there are any speakers. Good evening.
Good evening. David Calverley, 9655 First Street. I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. I'll try and be brief, recognize the 4 minutes, but this is something about which I feel very strongly. I have written, thank you, to council, and I'm sure it has been received, so I'm not going to repeat what I put in writing. I will mention that I have, since writing, talked with Al Smith, as an example, from the Chamber of Commerce, who tells me that he's very concerned. I feel free to quote him. He said, and that there are currently 3 businesses looking for space over on the industrial side and not finding it. I could mention, you know, when I was involved with the West Side LAP, that meant approximately 20% of the industrial land on that west side was lost, because all of that residential area was at that time, and in fact currently, zoned as industrial. The West Side group over there, the Sydney North Saanich Industrial Group, when we attended meetings on that, were very concerned about that. They would prefer that, in fact, as housing was lost under the current OCP, that it was replaced with more industrial land. I disagreed at that time, and I still think it was right. I like the approach that we have now with mixed use buildings in that West Side LAP, something that would be ideal for something like Pooch Parlour. But that may have contributed, in fact, to the demise of SNIG. They felt that there's little point in carrying on, some of the members. And in fact, if we look now, there is no representation from the West Side or the Marine Group in the EAC. I don't think it's apathy. I think it's a question that it's futile. I've been involved for many years now about the economic development. I read the report that's on tonight's agenda, and I'm very encouraged. But that's not what it's about. This, as my predecessor just said, this is about the OCP. This whole discussion is about the OCP. It's the foundation of our town. It's about zoning, sure, but it's about vision. The first part of the draft OCP lays out our vision. The review has been conducted under the shadow of a pandemic, and it will be the legacy of this council. And I think it's been done very, very well, given those difficult circumstances. But communication has been excellent throughout the town, throughout the community. whether we agree with that or we don't. The final outcome, I mean. But certainly the communication has been good. People have got to understand what is an OCP, and they've got to understand how important it is. And the idea is that it's not to be changed except under exceptional circumstances. Perhaps another pandemic, perhaps an economic crisis. Fortunately, the legislation makes it difficult to change an OCP. I'm pleased because tonight is not the end of the process. I'm not a biblical scholar, and so I think that there's nothing new under the sun actually comes from the Old Testament. But it's applicable here. There is nothing new. There's a very similar situation to this situation if we go back to 2019. Cut Cartel established a business over there on the west side. By reputation, they put in thousands of dollars in modifications into that particular building over there before they discovered that they didn't have a building permit and they couldn't get a license because they were over in an industrial area. I think there's a real parallel there. They moved over here. I think there was a few people that thought they would never succeed, but they did. And in fact, there's a spin-off for that business right here in the commercial sector in Sydney that both businesses have been successful. Something we should learn from. It's not impossible. I just wonder why there was no objections when presumably Pooch Parlour also asked for a building permit before they did modifications over there. Why no warning? Just wondered. Pooch Parlour is a well-run business. It's been in business for a long time. It's experienced. It's been through this process before. I can't understand why they made a mistake, but presumably they did. I don't doubt it. Poor old Cut Cartel, of course, for them it was a new policy, a new procedure. They were a bit lost in there. And it's going to be a very expensive mistake for Pooch Parlour because really they cannot operate at the moment. They certainly would have no permits, no inspections, presumably no insurance. God forbid they would operate and have an accident to an animal because they'd have no liability. It's just my guess. I'm not also an expert on insurance. But they got good support. They're really good at marketing. It's the kind of company we need in Sydney. They got good personal response here in this chamber. They got good written response. And they also got good print response and on social media. My hat's off to them. I think we need them. They obviously, people here need them, and I think we should try and find a way. But that solution should not be to significantly alter our OCP. There has to be another way. There really should. A short-term permit maybe, as was discussed, perhaps 1 year with a renewal for another year, give them a chance to get back in the commercial sector. I don't know. I leave you with the comment. I mean, I stubbed my toe this morning and it hurts. I don't think heart surgery would be a good solution to fixing that toe. And I think that, quite honestly, we have a small problem here and we shouldn't denigrate an OCP to fix it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Calvert.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is John Trelevin. I live on 3rd Street, 101 floor. I thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. And let me just say one thing. As a citizen of Sydney for many years, thank you for the efforts of the elected officials and the staff for getting us through a totally unprecedented period in the history of all of us. It has not been easy, I'm sure, for any of you. But as a citizen, a taxpayer, and a proud resident of this city, I'm proud of how you've led the community through this in very difficult times. And not all have succeeded as well as this town has in confronting these circumstances. I'm here this evening to speak in favor of your reaching deep and finding a temporary solution for the problem that Pooch Parlour finds itself in. Mistakes happen. We're at a time when, for the last 2.5 years, all 3 levels of government, indeed here and around the world, have had to do things they never thought that they would have to do to save the public, to save the business community, to save government institutions in a very difficult set of circumstances. Mistakes happen. This is not a time to enforce, well, this is not a time to focus on a mistake. It's a time to focus on how it can be corrected if it can be. By the way, I completely agree that changing the OCP for this one circumstance is not a good idea. If the council has it within its power to issue a temporary permit for a year or 2 to ensure the continuing operation of a very successful business in the hands of a very capable entrepreneur, that is what I think you should do. I would recall with pride as a citizen and with respect to the council and the staff, when early on in the pandemic, you took the decision to reduce the business tax rate for all businesses in this community in view of the circumstances, which, by the way, at that time, we didn't really understand fully how serious this was going to be. But Mr. Mayor, I remember your words on that occasion in this council chamber. I saw it by Zoom, of course. And it was, we as a council may not be able to do very much to assist the business community to get through this crisis. But this we can do, and you did. And as far as I'm aware, you're the only council in the region that cared that much about the business community that you took a very courageous decision. And I salute you for that. The owner of this business has been collecting taxes from her customers for this community for how many years? 9, 10 years? She has admitted clearly that she made a mistake. If you have it within your power to grant a temporary use permit without having to amend the OCP, I would encourage you to do so. As British Columbians, we've all been guided through this period by a most amazing medical officer of health. And just recall the words of Bonnie Henry: be kind, be calm, and be safe. The first 2 words were be kind. And she said that because she understood, perhaps better than some of us did, how difficult the days ahead were. Hopefully we're coming out the end of that, but not necessarily. And here you have in your hands the fate of a very successful, a very popular business. By the way, I do not own a dog, okay? So in the interest of, no conflict of interest here, but many of my neighbors do. And I live on 3rd Street, and eventually you're gonna have to replace all those trees because they're slowly being killed by the hundreds of animals that walk by there every day. These are extraordinary times. You took an extraordinary decision, and you've taken several through the pandemic, but I mentioned the taxation one. You have now the opportunity to take a decision of a different kind, but a kind decision. I've been to the site. The first time I became interested in municipal affairs was when the council introduced a new signage bylaw. It's the only one I've ever read. It was 14 pages long. And I thought, whoa, 2 paragraphs applied, but 3 paragraphs applied to the residents, everything else applied to the businesses. I thought, oh my goodness, you have to be a lawyer to figure out how the signage bylaw works. Things are complicated at the municipal level. I know that very well. You have an opportunity now to make a courageous decision on behalf of one entrepreneur. I'd only ask one question. In the complexity of permitted uses, I find it really interesting that on that site, the building beside it has a car detailing operation, and this is a dog detailing operation. I appreciate how difficult it must be to dance on the head of that pin. I support completely the need to protect industrial land. Please find a temporary solution that will allow this wonderful entrepreneur and her customers to benefit from the service that she loves to provide and they love to receive. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Treleaven. We'll call for last time, and I think we have our last member of the public in the chamber to speak.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. What a pleasure to be actually back here in person. Truly a treat. My name is Steve Duck, 2243 Amelia Avenue here in Sydney. I'm here to chat, like the previous speakers, on item 12B, the recommendation number 1 of an OCP amendment. On a higher level, I'm really concerned that you're looking at an OCP amendment in the midst of an OCP draft. And I think that for sake of timing, this can be deferred. Further to that, with a specific issue to address the bit of a problem that Pooch Parlour has gotten into, and fully appreciate the challenge that Council's trying to find a way to work around that. And at the last Council meeting, I think you were very close, and certainly I think you can pursue that, but not at the cost of industrial zoned land. We don't have any more industrial zoned land. That's it. We can't add any more. And as a strong proponent and involved in the local agricultural industry, I'm a fear that once we lose that agricultural land, we'll start tapping, our industrial land will start tapping agricultural land, which is proximate to it. And that worries me even more. And we've seen that happen in other jurisdictions, specifically the Fraser Valley. We need that industrial land. We need it because we continue to incubate small businesses that permeate the Saanich Peninsula. I know all of you, if not, have been on past tours of industry that the Chamber of Commerce have offered, and I've been on those, and you see those small pieces of business that have grown into bigger ones. One of the previous speakers mentioned Melinda's Biscotti, which has grown from a basement operation to an international service now, and providing their product with production facilities in Toronto and here in Sydney, or North Saanich. So those properties are essential to have. That land, again, we can't make any more of it, certainly not Sydney. We're surrounded by water or North Saanich. I think you were on the verge of a solution last council meeting. I think there is an opportunity. I think there is the tool in a temporary use permit. It's not a vehicle that's typically used in an industrial zone. Typically you use it for things like using land when, for example, when the McTavish interchange went in, there was a temporary use permit to allocate that land, which is currently known as the Gateway properties, for holding paving and equipment over through that production period. So it's there. Previous speakers have mentioned that. Let's look at that, please. Please reconsider not amending the OCP, but finding a way for a positive solution that allows this business to continue operating there for 1 or 2 years while they look for alternative space and not at risk of the industrial zoned properties. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Duck. So that will close our general public participation period, and I will just quickly refer to the special public participation periods again for the liquor license applications, and it would just turn to members of the public in the chamber if anyone wanted to speak to either of the two license applications this evening. Seeing none, I will consider us to have provided the opportunity for special public participation for those two licenses applications, and they will come up later on the agenda. We have no presentations this evening. We'll move to section 5, bylaws. We have two bylaws. 5A is bylaw number 2224, water utility rates and charges, amendment number 1. We've considered it at a previous meeting and moved readings, and we can consider adoption this evening.
I'll move that the bylaw be adopted.
Second.
Moved and seconded. I'll call a question. All in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. And 5B is bylaw number 2225, our sewer service charges amendment number 20, and a recommendation to adopt.
I'll move adoption.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor? Opposed? None opposed, that carries. Thank you. We'll turn to section 7, adoption of minutes. We have the minutes from our regular council meeting of March 14th.
I'll move that the minutes be adopted.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. Thank you. And under section 9, rise and report from in-camera meetings. At our regular council in-camera meeting of February 28th, council made the following resolution, which we're now reporting out, and that is that the memorandum of understanding for the Beacon Avenue West roundabout and realignment of Sterling Way between the town, the District of North Saanich, and the Victoria Airport Authority be approved as presented. Council at that meeting also provided rise and report through a joint media release, Sydney North Saanich and the VAA, which did occur and has been in the local media, and we're pleased to see that significant initiative move forward in a partnership. I'll next move to Mayor's report, and I have 3 verbal items that I'll turn to briefly here. The first is that normally at the second council meeting of the month, we have appended to our agenda the CRD board highlights. And I apologize, I was away for the last 7 days and didn't have that appended to this evening's agenda. As it turns out, there wasn't items I wish to highlight, but I will have that appended at the next agenda for the record. The second is council will recall at the February meeting on the CRD highlights report out, I indicated that the CRD board had approved moving the CRD Regional Park Strategic Plan to public engagement, and that commenced earlier this month. And I just wanted to shout out to everyone that there are 2 opportunities to participate in the engagement process. The first is a online survey that you can access through the CRD website, and that is available or open until April the 4th. And the second is that the third online information session, again, the link through the CRD website is available April 1st to conclude that process. And I think it's always a nice reminder that the CRD Parks protects and manages more than 13,300 hectares of natural areas in 32 regional parks and 3 regional trails on southern Vancouver Island and the Gulf Islands. And the updated Regional Park Strategic Plan will set the direction for regional parks and trails over the next decade. Several stakeholder groups have been engaged, and now this is the opportunity for the public at large to provide input. My third verbal update is a little bit on the lighter side. Folks may be aware that our local Peninsula Panthers junior hockey team is in the Vancouver Island Championship against the Oceanside Generals. And the Mayor of Parksville, Mayor Ed Maines, took the initiative along with his colleague, Qualicum Mayor Brian Weiss, to challenge and initiate a friendly wager to North Saanich Mayor Jeff Orr, Central Saanich Mayor Ryan Windsor, and myself, with regards to the championship series. And the losing side will have to wear the opposing jersey in the council meeting and fly the flag for a day at the town hall. I'm pleased to report that the series commenced last week, and as some may know, the Peninsula Panthers are up 3-0, and the 4th game is this evening at 7:30, and if we are very efficient tonight, I may try to catch the remainder of that game. That concludes my verbal report. If I could have a motion to receive, please.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. I'll now turn to a number of councillor reports, and the first I'll turn to Councillor Renewal, who is our representative from council sitting as a director on the Crest Corporation, and I'll let Councillor Renewal acknowledge one of the larger acronyms in our region. Councillor Renewal.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I'm speaking today with respect to CREST, the Capital Region Emergency Services Telecommunications Organization. And CREST is responsible for the emergency communications infrastructure. And I guess I might liken it to a cell phone service provider in that they provide all the infrastructure for communication. They also provide contracts with radio providers, and CREST is responsible for the clarity of that airtime in which emergency services personnel can communicate with their colleagues and with emergency dispatch. I've spoken to this previously. The general manager of CREST, Gord Horth, also appeared before council. So for some time, we've been discussing the strategic priority of CREST to ensure a post-disaster level of building and security for emergency services responses throughout the capital region. And CREST board at their annual general meeting will be voting on proceeding with this project that's outlined in the briefing note that was circulated to council. So this project is estimated to cost approximately $16 million, the balance of which being funded through Municipal Finance Authority. And based on CREST's projections of the project, that the project can be carried out with the existing mandate that shareholders have for a 2.9% annual budget increase to CREST. So in that sense, we don't envision new expenditures for the municipalities in relationship to this undertaking and being able to service the debt. I think it's fair to acknowledge that in this climate of escalating costs, that the CREST board and CREST management will be very attuned to the building market as this proceeds. And so on the assumption that at the annual general meeting, CREST gets 2/3 of the support from its shareholders to move forward with the project, there remains opportunities for the board to consider escalating costs for one thing. It's got to go through a tender phase and construction approvals, et cetera. So there are opportunities to kind of re-envision how this looks in this escalating market. But for the time being, CREST has secured suitable land for the project and is optimistic to move forward and address this number one item in its strategic plan. So I'll leave my background there, Mr. Mayor, and we'll answer any questions if there are any from my colleagues.
Thank you, Councillor. So I will turn to colleagues if there are any questions. And I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Yep.
We can.
I think you're frozen now.
Stable?
Yep, I can. You're frozen now.
Okay. So the only question I had for Councillor Renewal was, or just clarification, that I understand that the financial impact to taxpayers is really minimal on this. I think it's mentioned in the report that there's a 2.9% increase that takes place every year. And so the additional cost for financing will be, I understand, pretty negligible for taxpayers.
Yeah, that's correct. The expectation is, and again, this has gone through the Audit and Finance Committee at CREST, along with the early construction estimates, that CREST will service this debt within that 2.9% level of increase, which is contractually in place between shareholders and the organization.
Great, that's all. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for the question and the reply. We do have if we could have a motion to receive, please.
So move. Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? I see none opposed. That motion carries. Thanks, Councillor Renewal. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett, our liaison to both the Memorial Park Society, Mary Windspears Centre, and the Sydney Museum and Archives Society.
Thank you, Mayor. I attended the annual general meeting March 12th for the Sydney Museum and Archives Society. And just want to report out that at the meeting, the executive of the board were elected. And I'd like to congratulate and thank the new chair, Mr. Bob Jones, vice chair, Ms. Shannon Newstadter, treasurer, Mr. Wayne Leach, and secretary, Ms. Susan Mercer, for stepping up to take these positions and help guide the board moving forward. I'd also like to take the time to acknowledge and thank Mr. Richard Novak for his work as the past chair and all the positive changes he spearheaded. As many in the community are aware, the LEGO exhibit is currently underway, and it will run until this Thursday, March 31st. So if you are planning to attend it, you have a few days left, but after that, it'll be taken down to prepare for the next exhibit, which is the Suitcase Project, which begins on Monday, April 4th. And this, to me, seems very interesting. I plan to attend myself. It's a traveling exhibit that will run until July 4th, and it comes to us from the Nakai National Museum and Cultural Center in Burnaby. It is a multimedia exhibition photographed by Kayla Isamura that examines the history and legacy of the dispossession and internment of Japanese Canadians during World War II. Also, some good news. The museum is successful in receiving a BC 150 Time Immemorial grant for over $21,000. They applied for 3, and this was the largest of the 3, so they're very excited to get the largest of them. The funding will be used to update the waterfront signage in collaboration with the Wasanich Nations. So that's something that will be to look forward to coming up in the future. Finally, with regards to this report, I want to inform council and the community that the Assistant Director and Archivist, Mr. Adrian Bogdan, as well as the Education and Outreach Coordinator, Ms. Sydney Furman, have both tendered their resignations to pursue other career opportunities. I wish to thank them for their time and excellent contribution to the museum and the community, and wish them well in their new careers. In the interim, Mr. Peter Garnham will be aiding Executive Director, Ms. Gerwing, in the running of the museum while the search for replacements continues.
Thank you.
I'll move on now to the Memorial Park Society, and I was at the annual general meeting on March 22nd. This was originally scheduled for November, but due to COVID, as so many other things, it just kept getting pushed back and pushed back. So we finally were able to have the meeting, and at that meeting, the executive was elected for two organizations, the Memorial Park Society, and the chair will be Ms. Sheila Fay, vice chair is Ms. Jane Batty, treasurer Mr. Ross Emery, and secretary Mr. Floyd Maylett. And for the Mary Windspear Foundation, the chair will be Ms. Linda Pendre, vice chair Ms. Jane Batty, treasurer Mr. Ross Emery, and secretary Mr. David Spence. Thank you to all those for stepping up to take on these roles for the board. The center ended the 2020 year with a slight deficit of just over $21,000. But given what 2020 was like, that's pretty incredible, actually, given what they function as in the community. I don't quite have the numbers for 2021. I'll bring those forth to council when they are out. But important thing to note is in the past 18 months, they've brought in approximately $250,000 in grant revenue. And they actually, at the meeting, we were advised that they just obtained another $26,000 grant from Creative BC. So they're doing a fantastic job of looking for outside sources for income. And the board, through all of it, was very pleased, and that all staff were kept on throughout the last 2 years, which is an incredible achievement when you consider what happened with all the jobs that were lost in so much of the economy. And at one point, with the COVID protocols in place for 50 people in attendance, the Bodine, I didn't even know this myself till I found this out, the Bodine Hall was the only venue open to entertainers to perform in Canada, which is shocking. Like, it's just amazing for our community that we were able to achieve something like that and nobody else could. An update on the parklet track. Nearly all funding has been achieved. If anybody's driven by there lately, you will notice there's fencing in place. They're about to commence work. So that's, they're almost there, and they're sure they're going to have the funding, so it's going ahead. And the new track should be completed in time for the new school year in September, which is great news. And they also have a plan in place for contingencies going forward, and they'll be approaching both our council and the North Saanich Council with details coming forward at some point. Not sure when yet. And finally, the last thing I want to update council and the community on is that Executive Director Mr. Brad Edgett will be resigning from his position effective June 30th, 2022. I'd like to take the time to thank Mr. Edgett for his decade of service to the Mary Windspears Center and this community. He has been a great leader for the center and will be missed. This was no more evident than during the past 2 years when he was able to guide the center through the pandemic with a nimbleness and amazing ability to pivot when needed. I wish Mr. Edgett and his family all the best for the future. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett, and I'm sure Council joins you in thanking Brad Edgett for his service to the community and what he's done for the Mary Windspears Center and Blue Heron Lands during his tenure. Councillor Garnet, I might just ask if you could just repeat the last part of that update with regards to contingencies.
From what I was told by the executive director, they have a plan. They have a plan in place for contingencies for the park, for the track moving forward, and they plan to address council in what I'm not sure exactly. He didn't frame what the specifics of it were, but they do plan to come before both councils to discuss whatever details. I'm not sure what specifically that means because he didn't mention it.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Any questions for Councillor Garnet on his two reports? Seeing none, if we could have a motion to receive both, please.
So move.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. Thank you again, Councillor. And I'll turn to Councillor Fallot, our liaison to the Artsy Community Arts Council.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Due to COVID, provincial legislation allowed for societies to delay their AGMs, and on Wednesday, March 23rd, I attended virtually the Artsy 2020 AGM. The 2021 AGM will be held later this fall. Artsy was able to adapt quickly during the COVID pandemic to deliver new or adapted programs for the community. And they did all of this with a very small working board of 5 tireless people and 1 staff member. At one point, the board was able to recruit 3 new members in 2022, but due to COVID and other matters, the 3 new members unfortunately were not able to stay on the board, so they're back down to 5. Artsy has, in news of what they're doing, they've also partnered with Coast Capital Savings in Sydney to display work of art from Artsy members. And the program is proving successful and has since expanded to the Shelburne branch, and with a possibility of additional branches showcasing Peninsula artists. Some of the events for Artsy is the Artsy Gallery in Tallista Park reopens on April 1st for artist-directed exhibitions. Artsy has invited the community to join the rock painting community and support Ukraine by painting small rocks for display at home or at the Artsy Gallery. And during the month of April, Artsy will be collecting cash donations at the gallery to send to the Red Cross for support to the Ukraine. 30 Artsy members are currently showing their work in the community during the 2nd annual Art Walk event, and it's presented by Artsy and the Sydney BIA. The works can be seen around Sydney in various businesses, predominantly along Beacon Avenue, until April the 18th. As well, Artsy recognizes the ongoing support from the town of Sydney, the District of North Saanich, and the District of Central Saanich, the latter who provided support through a 2021 grant and aid. Artsy was able to award grants for 4 organizations that will be providing arts and cultural performances in 2022. The Via Corellis Performance Society, Ina Kleine Summer Music, Folk and Fiddle, and Caravan Stage Society. I would also like to point out that at the gallery in Tallista Park, Artsy has on display a photo of the Raven and Eyes of Stolen Children by Coast Salish artisan Kathleen Rose Spears. This piece of work was selected for the Juror's Choice Award at the 2017 Sydney Fine Arts Show. Artsy Board purchased Kathleen's work during the 2017 show and has since donated it to the University of Victoria for placement in the People's House. And as well, they have a number of other displays at the Tallista Art Gallery of Coast Salish people's work. And that sort of ends my Artsy update for now. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate the update, Councillor Fallot. Any questions for Councillor Fallot? Seeing none, look for motion to receive.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? None opposed. That motion carries. Thank you. And I'll turn to we're going now to committee reports under Section 12. The first under 12A is the Economic Advisory Committee meeting of March 10th, and I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright, our liaison.
I'll move that the minutes be received.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Nope.
Call a question. All in favor? None opposed. That motion carries. And I'll again turn to Councillor Wainwright, who is chair of our committee of the whole meeting on March 21st.
Okay, I'll move that the minutes be received.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions? Call a question. All in favor? None opposed. Motion carries.
Okay, there are three recommendations from committee. The first one is with respect to Pooch Parlour, OCP amendment application number OP 10037, and zoning amendment application number RZ 100106, and this is for 101 2031 Malview Avenue. So the recommendation from committee, and I so move that the OCP and zoning bylaws be amended to permit personal service establishments in the M1 zone in West Sydney. And
Second.
We have a seconder. Councillor Wainwright?
thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we've had quite a bit of discussion about this. I'd like to move an amendment that in the M1 zone in West Sydney be replaced with as a conditional permitted use at 101 2031 Malview Avenue West.
Do we have a seconder on that amendment?
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Councillor Wainwright?
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So basically, the amendment that I'm proposing reduces the scope of the proposed change so that it only affects the one specific property. And yes, this does sound like it's a permanent change, but I understand that staff have got a suggestion about how that might be addressed.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to staff if they would like to comment on this amendment. Good evening, Mr. Newcomb.
Good evening. So it's not so much a direct way to address it. It would be addressed indirectly by the adoption of a new official community plan. If the official community plan is adopted substantially as drafted right now, this is not, of course, the current official community plan, but the one that's out for community engagement. The proposed, I guess, amendment to the current official community plan would not be in there, and the OCP would sort of revert to its original state with regard to this issue if adopted as proposed. That would, of course, keep the zoning in place, however, and the use permitted by the zoning would continue as long as the zoning permitted it. If the zoning was then changed, the use would continue as a legally non-conforming use until such time that they no longer obtain the protections under the Local Government Act. So that's stopping the use for 6 months or more. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Mayor, if I could expand on that. So essentially, if the comprehensive OCP review were to essentially roll back the amendment that we're just proposing to make, what would happen is Pooch Parlour would in effect be grandfathered. The door would be closed because the OCP amendment would be gone. Pooch Parlour would still be there, and they would be able to continue. So the amendment I've proposed would narrow the scope of the possible change to just that one property, so other businesses could not sneak in before the OCP review is completed to establish themselves there. You know, that this permitted use would only be that one property, and then if the OCP review puts it back the way it was, which people are telling us to do, Pooch Parlour would be grandfathered, or if they went somewhere else, that use would end. It would no longer be grandfathered, it would be gone. So in effect, we would be protecting the industrial area, except for Pooch Parlour, and Pooch Parlour would be temporary. If they ever left or ceased to be doing that use, it would no longer be grandfathered. So this seems to be an approach that leaves the minimum possibility of another business getting in there before we have all our ducks in a row. and it allows Pooch Parlour to continue. And it kind of looks permanent, but if we do go ahead and roll it back in the OCP review, then it is in fact a temporary thing, only as long as the business is there. I think that's everything I would say, and if anyone has questions, you should probably be asking staff.
Thank you, Councillor Wainwright. So, given the amendment and a comment from staff already, I will turn to colleagues if you have a question of staff with regards to the amendment. I would ask that you hold your comments or motivations until questions are completed, and then we can deliberate. I think I saw Councillor Renewal and then Councillor O'Keefe.
No, thank you. I was going to speak to the amendment, so I'll yield to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe, a question?
Yes, so I just want to clarify the process through you to staff. So if we were to move ahead with this particular suggestion, we would still have to do an OCP amendment. And I understand from our previous discussions that would take, we still have to go through the community engagement process, the consultation process, which could take about, say, 2 or 3 months. Is my understanding of that correct?
Mr. Newcomb?
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. The OCP amendment, I would say, does depend on the degree of the OCP amendment being made. So for example, I mean, this is of course just with staff's recommendation to council in terms of how staff believe it would be appropriate to consult on that OCP amendment. But a very scope limited amendment, I think does not require as much consultation on that amendment given the limited scope. For example, the motion that was made at Committee of the Whole, or sort of the resolution that was made at the Committee of the Whole to add personal service establishment across the entire M1 zone and amend the OCP to allow for that is a change that's much broader in scope, and I think is likely worthy of more consultation on that. So it really does, the timing, how long that consultation takes depends on the bylaw that comes forward for consideration.
Okay, and follow up if I may.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering how that process might bump into or impact our current OCP process, if that's a concern at all. Because we're getting to the point where we're in final consultations, the final draft. And so how this process that's being proposed tonight might impact on that.
Again, I really think it depends on the scope of the OCP amendment being considered. If it's a broader scope, and for example, it's referred out to other organizations like an adjacent municipality or a regional government, staff would have to be very clear that there are 2 OCP amendments in stream, and I don't necessarily think that they would affect one another. However, if the ultimate bylaw adoption for each bylaw comes in very close together, I think there'll be some challenges in terms of what happens first. It really depends on the scope of the bylaw amendment and how long the other OCP process takes, which still remains an unknown.
Okay, and I'm also wondering how, just trying to get a better understanding of how this process differs from one of the proposals or the proposal staff put forward in terms of temporary use permit. So my understanding with both processes, we still need to go through the OCP amendment process. But with the temporary use permit, there would be a defined time on that. And at the end of that time, we would expect the individual to have found other premises. But in the process that's being proposed tonight is we're setting them up so it's being called temporary, but it's not really temporary my understanding is that we would go through the process and we would be grandfathering them and allowing them to stay. And I guess I wonder, staff had some concerns about if we were to do, you know, something like this to allow this individual to operate in this way, how might that impact perception with other businesses? If you have any comment on that.
Well, the OCP amendment allows for the zoning change, or the OCP amendment allows for a temporary use permit to be issued. In the case of the zoning change, as long as that zoning amendment bylaw that follows the OCP amendment is in place, the business is not grandfathered. The business is operating under a permitted use for that zone. In the case of a temporary use permit, council can specify a timeline for the permit of up to 3 years with the possibility of 1 renewal. And once that timeline finishes, the business must close and vacate. So in the first case with the zoning amendment, council is creating a permanent permission for the business to operate that can only be changed by a subsequent zoning change to disallow that use. And even in that case, the Local Government Act provides protection for that business to continue operating as a quote-unquote grandfathered use, a legally non-conforming use, until such time they cease operating for 6 months or more. In the case of the temporary use permit, once the temporary use permit timeline is done, the business must close and vacate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff. I guess I'm struggling with the way it's worded in terms of, does staff have any concerns with it seeming to be benefiting one individual business?
Through the mayor to Councillor Garnett, no. Municipalities make zoning amendments all the time. For example, a comprehensive development zone for a development that benefits a single entity. So there's no issue there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Turn to your colleagues again if there are any questions on staff comments. Seeing none, I'll turn back to Councillor Wainwright if you had any further motivations.
Thank you. There was one comment I did want to make because it came up in the public participation. We do not have the ability to issue a temporary use permit without doing an OCP amendment. So there is no solution that allows the business to stay without doing an OCP amendment. The only question is what the OCP amendment would be.
Thank you for that, Councillor. I noted that as well. And sorry, the seconder of the motion was Councillor Renewal.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I'll thank Councillor Wainwright for what I think is probably a good compromise a suggestion here with this amendment. And I'll support the motion. If the motion were to fail, I think I'd continue to support the original motion. But ultimately, what this does, if this motion passes, is it gives those who we're most comfortable with amending to permit personal service establishments in the M1 zone. It gives them the opportunity to address that through the new OCP that we're working on. So I don't think this eliminates that option from proceeding in the future if that's the will of the OCP review process. But this does enable the type of adjustment that we were looking for coming out of the majority committee of the whole. So I will support the motion to amend. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Before turning to colleagues, I do have a question through staff for clarification, and that is, if this amendment were to pass, and the amended motion was to pass, then for it to proceed, for the final outcome to be that the comprehensive draft, OCP draft, that is before the community for engagement now, is looking to be approved, or we're looking to approve it, say, in the month of June, we would want to make this particular amendment prior to approving the comprehensive OCP. Because if we didn't do that, then in effect we would be amending the new OCP, and it would be permanent.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn to colleagues if there's any further comment. Go ahead, Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So I'm not in support of the amendment or the initial motion. Most of the points I made, I think, were covered last week. What I was leaning more towards was considering a temporary use permit. And the reason for that is I think council is going too far to allow this grandfathered use on an ongoing basis. It's unfortunate that the business is in the situation that they're in, but I don't think it's necessarily the role of council to solve all of their issues. I think what I heard in the public participation was that there was a desire to give this business a bit of latitude in order to find a more suitable premises. And that, I believe, stemmed from the fact that she had signed a lease for a year. She's committed to that. So was there a way that we could allow her to continue working in that location until the end of her lease, which I believe is in December? So I would be more inclined to support something like that. The other issue, I guess, in terms of, I know that we want to be seen as a council that listens and supports business. I have no concerns about that. I think we have a good reputation in the CRD and how we support business. But I think the thing that's most important is that we provide a level playing field and that we treat all businesses the same. So I guess what I would be concerned about is that if we have a situation like this in the future, another business comes along. Staff had made comments, for example, in some of the information they sent to us that, you know, someone might set up in the M1 and look at as a retail business under the assumption that it's permitted because they see the feed barn there. And then they find out that it's not zoned for that. And then they come to us and say, hey, well, you did this for Pooch Parlour. How about doing it for us? And so I would find it difficult to say no to anybody else in the past. So I won't support this, but I would be interested in considering something along the temporary use permit. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Fallett.
Thank you. I'm really amazed at how much time and energy we're putting into someone else's problem. This is really between Pooch Parlour and their landlord, the person that they got the sublease off. This is not the municipality's responsibility to find a solution to the dilemma that they find themselves in. I don't envy their situation. I'm glad it's not me that's going through it, and all of those. And as one of the speakers in public participation spoke about, they've got really good community support and all of those things. But to come to the municipality asking for an amendment, OCP amendment and zoning amendment, and for us now to be going through the second evening and more, by the sounds of it, we may be going through more conversations. This is not our problem to solve or to find a solution. And this is, and going back again to one of the speakers about, you know, helping business and situation. This is not COVID related. This is not about a flood or a fire that's happened and we're trying to pivot and help out a business that's impacted by something outside of all of that. This is someone who didn't do their due diligence. And I've talked to a couple of people regarding the industrial area, and maybe this is a time, I don't mean right now this evening, but maybe as we're going through the OCP, we need to take another look at what we've got in the industrial area and what businesses are permitted. So be it, but it should not be about this one business. And when I start hearing about grandfathering, then we're going to put ourselves right in the same situation where this individual looked over at the feed barn and the groomers over there and said, well, if they're allowed, then why am I not allowed? I think we're doing something we should not be doing. This is not our business to do it. And it's not because I'm being hard-hearted and not listening. I'm looking at the entire community. And I sat for 4 years in the previous term, and I remember the conversations and the public who came and said, don't change the OCP in midstream. If we're going to look at making changes, then we should look at it holistically and through the whole thing, not through the lens of one proponent looking for special permission. This is too much. We've got staff trying to figure out, I keep thinking square peg, round hole. And that's, I think, exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to make something fit because we want to. This is a very nice person who's got a great business and has got lots of support. And it seems like we're being really mean if we deny the application. That's not what this is about. This is about the whole community. And a few weeks ago, we talked about exercising good governance. And I think good governance is when we say, take the subjective out of it and look at this objectively. And that's what we need to do. I will not support the amendment. I will not support the main motion. And I would look to make a motion to deny this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fallett. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I've given this actually a lot of thought since our last meeting last Monday, and I did support the motion of the evening, and it was more or less from my perspective. I didn't get a chance to explain myself because I found the whole meeting to be a little bit disjointed, so I'll try and be succinct tonight. I wanted to hear from the public, more of the public than just the people supporting of the business. And that has happened in the past week, even before we had an OCP where the public hearing would occur. We've heard from a member tonight of the EAC. I've heard from the chamber, the head of the chamber, and that gives me a more fulsome perspective on the whole criteria. And Councillor Fallett, I echo a lot of her points, and it's true. It's difficult. This is a good business owner operating a good, successful business in our community. Made an honest mistake, went into a spot where it's not zoned for that use. I do struggle and have trouble and find problematic the fact that staff informed them when they applied for the business license that they couldn't get a license in that area, and they still continue to operate, and that does bother me somewhat. I think hearing that there are people looking for industrial space and knowing how limited the space is that we have there, somebody could say, well, it's only 400 square feet, but that could be an industry that could fit in there, and now they don't have that space. I feel bad for the person, but that can't come into my decision making, because the OCP is pretty important, and I don't like the fact that we're going through a draft stage with comments and engagement and talking about doing an amendment, trying to squeeze it in all before we go through the process of finalizing adoption of the current or the OCP that's to come. And I think it's gonna be confusing to the public to some degree, and I'm not comfortable with the decision that way. I won't support the amendment or the main recommendation as well. I don't think we should be going down the road of amending the OCP at this point in time. As I said, I feel horrible for the person that this has happened to, but it does, as Councillor Fallett suggested, come down to due diligence and doing your homework and making sure you can fit in there. And if it doesn't fit, then it's tough, but it's the nature of the beast, and you have to find another place to go. It's just been difficult, but yeah, I'm not going to support the amendment or the main motion. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to any other first-time speakers. Seeing none, I'll take an opportunity to speak. I've revisited our considerable deliberations last meeting, and approached it from a couple of new perspectives for myself. One of the questions that came to mind, it actually came up during our deliberations, was currently commercial uses are permitted, and as was stated last meeting, those include restaurants, convenience stores, fitness centers. I did confer with Mr. Newcomb before the meeting, and there are some other uses, but more industrial type commercial uses, so I won't mention those. Retail sales are also permitted where the product being sold is manufactured on site. And I can think of at least 3 fairly significant examples of retailers on the west side in Sydney that are selling retail goods that they do not manufacture on site. So we have that situation. We have the situation which we've heard that Feed Barn is there and that's grandfathered. That North Saanich may have different rules, and there's a vet clinic in North Saanich and that sort of thing. So it's understandable to a degree how this mistake occurred. But last week I supported and actually put forth the recommendation to amend to allow another subset of commercial businesses, that is personal service establishments. And it was commented there, a speaker commented tonight, how those are limited. And with the motion that was passed, that's on the floor, the main motion, is there is still room for staff or room for council to narrow that range of personal service establishments. My thinking was that West Sydney, not just industrial businesses, but residents, have looked for additional types of services on the west side. But what I did is I thought more closely about these particular personal service establishments, whether they be a dog grooming business, whether they be hair cutting. We had the example of Cut Cartel that came forward, and that was one of the reasons, and I did mention it last meeting, that I was comfortable with an amendment to allow this subset, because I believe that industrial businesses over there could appreciate having a barber in that area, and that is the space that a barber takes or Pooch Parlour takes significant in the industrial lands. And I also made the comment, we've heard last week, again this evening, about limited lands and that sort of thing. There's limited industrial buildings built now, but there are lots of industrial lands. There is still vacant industrial lands in Sydney, and there is considerable vacant industrial lands on the Airport Authority. That doesn't mean that a small business, industrial business, could not have a challenge today in locating, relatively small premises. So that is acknowledged. But these personal service establishments that I've described, what the trigger in reconsidering this was, is why would you allow restaurants, convenience stores, and fitness centers? And it does say in the staff report, last week's staff report, to support the primary industrial businesses and their employees. Those types of uses are uses that could be used on a very frequent basis, on a daily basis, or several times of a week basis, and you can see why it would be convenient to the business, the employees to have those businesses there. When you think of a dog grooming business or a hair cutting business or the like, they're not a business you're going to frequent several times a week. So that convenience aspect, while is not the same, is not equivalent in terms of those ones that are currently permitted. So that was a trigger for me in terms of that. The other different perspective I took since last council meeting is that what if a new business, a new dog grooming business, had come to council requesting an OCP amendment and a zoning amendment to allow them to locate in the M1 zone? How would this council have, staff recommendation would have been the same? How would this council have considered it? And I don't think we would have had 20 people in the chamber or up to 300 or 400 customers from an ongoing, long-established business coming before council saying, yes, we support this new business and its application to establish in the M1 zone. So to me, I've taken a different look at it, and while I think that there probably is a time and place to consider broadening very narrowly commercial uses in the M1 zone, I don't think now is the time. I don't think now is the time with this particular application, which is a change of heart for myself from last week. But I also don't think so because of the process we're involved with the comprehensive review of the OCP. So I want to come back to the distinction with regards to support for this business and whether it's our business and how we move forward with this. We have a situation, we understand the mistake that was made. It's regrettable. But what we do have is we have a somewhat unique business in Sydney with hundreds of customers, not just Sydney residents. Surely there's going to be customers outside Sydney. But it's a business established for 8+ years in Sydney. And we've had, and I'm sure if there was more time, we would have more of those customers who appreciate that business come before council and do that. One of the other reasons I don't think it's appropriate to go through the OCP amendment at this time is while we're looking at the draft of the comprehensive review, is I don't want to see hundreds of residents or hundreds of clients for this business come and support it, and then have dozens of businesses, many of them significant in the industrial zone, perhaps represented by the chamber, represented by others, come and create this conflict between, okay, this is what the hundreds of residents want and think is reasonable for this, and then you have these industrial businesses. I think council has to show leadership in making a reasonable decision on this. And I think that this is the type of business that people can't just go to the internet and get their dog groomed. There isn't an easy alternative to go to this business, and we've heard that there isn't a lot of other businesses. So I think it's a significant business and unique in those respects. And I think I've revisited the temporary use permit and the discussion that we've, in some of the questions that council has been able to ask staff since the last meeting, and that while I argued fairly vociferously against the temporary use permit because I didn't want to set a precedent for that, I actually believe it's the right way to go. And I believe it's the right way to go because it places a limitation, and through our deliberations, we can communicate our expectation that we're providing a one-year term for this, and that our expectation is we won't be the sitting, all of us may not be the sitting council of the day when that comes back, but clearly we will have stated our intention, and I gather there will be some carryover from this council to the next, and that intent can be carried through, and that the message is received in that fashion by the owners of Pooch Parlour. So for those reasons, I will change, and I won't support the amendment. I appreciate that we would accomplish virtually the same thing through this amendment, but it came up in our discussion, Councillor O'Keefe and staff, that there is a distinction to be drawn between this amendment and grandfathering it is. This business could be here 20 years from now, versus going with a temporary use permit and providing 1 year. And while there is an opportunity for apply up to a 3-year extension after 1 year, we can certainly address that at the appropriate time. I'll leave my remarks there, and I'll turn to any speakers, one councillor for a first time, any other councillors for a second time. Okay, so I'll call the question on the amendment. All those in favor? Opposed? We have 4 opposed. The motion fails. Those opposed are Councillor Garnett, Councillor Fallett, Councillor Keefe, and myself. So the amendment fails, so we have the main motion on the floor, which was the motion moved from Committee of the Whole. Is there any discussion on the main motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Are those opposed? We have 4 opposed. The motion fails. Councillor Garnett, Councillor Fallett, Councillor O'Keefe, and myself. So we no longer have a motion on the floor with regards to the applications, the two applications, the OCP amendment application and the zoning application. So council will need to pass, put a new motion on the floor. Councillor Fallot.
I'll move that the official community plan amendment application number OP 100037 and zoning amendment application number RZ 100106 for the property at 2031 Malaview Avenue West be denied.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. I'll turn to the mover if they wish to speak further. You have motivated, but
Just, no, I think I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
no, fair enough. Councillor Garnett? Okay, I'll turn to any other speakers. Councillor Renewal.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm hopeful that this motion fails and that someone who's spoken in favor this evening of temporary use will put forward a motion for us to give some consideration to this. I think we're kidding ourselves that a dog grooming business is going to get the red carpet in the commercial district of Sydney. I think we're kidding ourselves if we don't think that this is a location at 400 square feet that we could make work. But I won't support denying this, chiefly because I think that this very unique business, which is in demand, a small business owner who has acknowledged they tried to find a third location in downtown Sydney to operate their business unsuccessfly, has ended up in this predicament. So I won't support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to other speakers. Seeing none, I'll call the question on the motion on the floor. All in favor? Opposed? We have 4 opposed. The motion fails. Councillor Duncan, Councillor Renewal, Councillor Wainwright, and myself are opposed. So again, we are left with no motion on the floor. So if no council member is willing to make a motion, I will move that number 1, that staff be directed to bring forward a bylaw to amend official community plan, bylaw number 1920, to allow for a commercial temporary use permit at unit 101-2031 Malaview Avenue West. 2, the staff bring forward for council's consideration a plan to consult with persons, organizations, and authorities it considers may be affected by the proposed official community plan amendment. 3, that zoning amendment application number RZ 100037 be denied. And 4, that council invite the applicant to apply for a commercial temporary use permit to allow Pooch Parlour to operate at 101-2031 Malaview Avenue West for a period of 1 year.
Second for discussion.
Moved and seconded. I think I motivated during previous discussions. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright.
If I think you mentioned in number 3, RZ 13037. It should be ending in 106. Yeah.
Okay, if I could just ask staff to correct the record, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor.
I guess a question through you to staff. Would it be possible, rather than rejecting the zoning amendment application that they paid a fee for, and then inviting them to pay a fee for a temporary use permit, could we simply modify that zoning amendment application to be a commercial temporary use permit application so we don't charge them yet another fee?
Through the chair to Councillor Wainwright, we can certainly look into the possibility of doing that.
Would a motion be, would an amendment be required, Mr. Newcomb?
I don't believe council can amend fees through a resolution, but I'll look to Mr. Humble for that.
If we could leave that with staff, perhaps?
If you could leave that with staff, again, there may be some challenges around procedural requirements around bylaws. Fees are dictated through bylaws.
Mr. Mayor, if that's the case, could we leave the zoning amendment application open in case it can be amended to become a temporary use permit? Because once you deny it, it's denied.
And the fee is forfeited.
Yep.
Yes, so if you want to amend removal of clause 3, I would concur with that. Sorry, we would be amending it to remove item 3.
Could we just deal with it in
Councillor
a
Adam?
separate? Yep.
Okay, so we will split the 4 parts of the motion. Thank you for that. Any further? Okay, I'll turn, Councillor Garnett?
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff, just want your feedback on what they've just proposed. If I can get that, please.
Yeah, so I'm gonna go out on a limb here and suggest that it's gonna be they made the application for the rezoning. They paid the fees for the rezoning. There's been process involved in terms of it. The fees for the rezoning are established through fees and charges bylaw. I think it's going to be challenging for us to be able to just transfer those rezoning fees to a temporary use permit fee. It's my understanding that the fees are less for a temporary use permit?
The OCP zoning fee is one fee for the 2 amendments, so I can't really say whether it's less or more. I certainly think we could look into the possibilities, but
Okay, I appreciate that. That's helpful, Mr. Humble. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe. Or sorry, the floor is with Councillor Garnett.
That's great. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mayor. A question through you to staff. Can we get an idea of what are the costs of these different fees that we're talking about? Is it hundreds or thousands of dollars, or?
the joint OCP zoning amendment fee, I see Ms. Verhagen up there. She probably knows this much better than I do.
Good evening, Ms. Verhagen.
Good evening. Through the mayor to council, the fee for the temporary commercial use permit is $1,700. And I'll just take a look at the fee for the joint zoning and OCP amendment application. It's $2,500 plus $1,500 plus $300. So sorry, I don't have that total offhand. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I guess something that's also resonating with me is staff's comment about significant amount of time involved in these applications, and that they've already spent and more to come. So I recognize and acknowledge staff's comments that this might be challenging also from a I guess legislative perspective as to whether we can save them any money on those fees. I'll just leave it at that in terms of the fees anyways. In regards to the, are we still asking questions to staff, or are we in discussion now?
No, the motion is on the four parts, the four motions as it were, they've been separated, are on the floor, and all of it are open for discussion.
Okay, thank you. I'll just, I find that I'm more able to support a temporary use permit. One question I had to you, Mr. Mayor, who moved this, is are we looking at 1 year because that was the term of their lease? And I guess what I'm wondering is if we're looking to allow a temporary permit for the purpose of the individual allowing to continue to operate because she has a lease commitment with her landlord, would we instead, would it be more appropriate to make the temporary use permit expire at the end of the lease, which I believe would be the end of the year? And I guess I'm just looking, maybe for your comments on that, and if staff have anything to add.
I don't see a comment from staff. My comment would be we don't have that particular information, a specific piece of information. If we pass, if we stay with 1 year that is within the motion, the lease is still going to expire when it expires, and the business is still going to have to make a decision, knowing what the length of the temporary use permit. So again, I'm not sure of the benefit. I'll turn to Ms. Verhagen.
Sure, thank you. Just a comment on the process for the temporary commercial use permit. There is a separate process for it. It does involve a report to committee of the whole, potential referrals to committees, and then there is a notification process with 2 ads published in the newspaper, and then a mail out to a 75-meter or 246 radius of the subject property, and then a public hearing is held before council decides whether to issue the permit or deny the application. So there is a process involved in that.
Thank you. That's helpful, Ms. Verhagen. Did you wish to continue, Councillor O'Keefe?
Yeah, I guess what I'm percolating on, and thank you, Ms. Verhagen, for that information. I'm just wondering if, given once the business owner knows that there might be a process that would, I don't know, it sounds like it could be a 2 or 3 month process, only to get a temporary use permit, whether she might just opt to sort of be cut loose, so to speak. But I guess that would be her option, I guess, even if we went ahead for the temporary use permit. So I think I'm okay with supporting a temporary use permit for 1 year, not thrilled about it. I think Councillor Fallett made a lot of good points about the role of local government in fixing individuals' businesses' problems, but maybe this is a compromise that we can make. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Fallett.
Thank you. Just, I too had a question regarding the period of 1 year, and perhaps a consideration to say up to a maximum of 1 year, the length of the lease, or whichever time is shorter.
I'll turn to staff if they have a comment. I think generally we have to be specific, but I'll turn to Mr.
Thank you,
Newcomb.
Mr. Mayor. My suggestion would be just 1 year from the date of the decision the council makes, and if the Pooch Parlour extends for say 6 months past the end of their lease, that's fine. They'll know that the use, that the permission to operate there is expiring, and I think that they would maybe go month to month or something like that, and then vacate the premises. We could certainly ask them for their lease information, but I think it would be simpler just for council to make a decision on the time period.
And I think you've just clarified, Mr. Newcomb, that the 1 year period would commence from granting the temporary use permit, not now.
Well, council could simply backdate it by making the period shorter to whatever month they chose to, but yeah, I mean, I would recommend a year from the date of the decision, if that's...
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fallett? Good, okay. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Sorry, can you clarify, are you breaking this up and you're voting on it in 4 sections, or are we voting on the first section?
We're voting on the first section. Thank you for the clarification.
Could you repeat it, please?
Sorry?
Could you repeat it, please?
Certainly. So number 1, that staff be directed to forward a bylaw to amend official community plan bylaw number 1920 to allow for a commercial temporary use permit at unit 101-2031 Malaview Avenue West. I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? I have 2 opposed. Councillor Garnett, Councillor Fallett. The motion carries. The second motion, that staff bring forward for council's consideration a plan to consult with persons, organizations, and authorities it considers may be affected by the proposed official community plan amendment. Any discussion? Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? 2 opposed. The motion carries. Councillor Garnett, Councillor Fallett were opposed. Number 3, that zoning amendment application number R, the correct number, be denied. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? The motion is defeated. Councillor Garnett, Councillor Fallot, Councillor Rentoul, and Councillor Wainwright were opposed. And we'll move to number 4, that council invite the applicant to apply for a commercial temporary use permit to allow Pooch Parlour to operate at 101-2031 Malaview Avenue West for a period of 1 year. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? I have 2 opposed. The motion carries. Councillor Garnett and Councillor Fallot were opposed. That concludes that item. Thank you, Council. Thank you, staff. And Councillor Wainwright, I'll let you continue with Committee of the Whole recommendations.
Thank you, Mayor. The second recommendation is with respect to the Climate Action Plan draft and engagement update, and it was recommended by committee, and I so move that 1, that staff be directed to proceed with the engagement activities for the Climate Action Plan as outlined in option 1, engagement activities, 2 pop-up tables in April, May to show community members key elements of the plan and provide opportunity for questions and answers, 1 to take place during a weekday, 1 to take place during a weekend to reach a range of people. Publicized through online and print media advertising, social media, inclusion in town talk, news release, etc. Leave draft open for comment, either through email or through a simple open-ended survey. And 2, that the climate action report be referred to APC for review and comment.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? All in favor. The motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, and the last recommendations with respect to the tax distribution policy was recommended by committee, and I so move that the tax distribution policy be referred to a future meeting.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? I'll call a question. All in favor? Opposed? 2 opposed. Councillor Garnett, Councillor Fallot. The motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wainwright. We'll turn to Section 13, staff reports, and we now move to the liquor license applications. Under 13A, we have liquor license amendment application number LA 507 with a summary of public feedback for 2243 Beacon Avenue, the Mary Windspears Center. And we have a recommendation.
I'll move the recommendation that number 1, that
Sorry, I will interrupt, Councillor. Yep. I did want to turn to Mr. Newcomb for a staff introduction.
Okay.
Thank you. My apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So following Council's resolution to send this out for public comment, we did send out notifications to a 100-meter radius around the site and put 2 advertisements in the Peninsula News Review. Following the advertising, we received 3, I believe, comments from the public, all in favor. Staff have seen this business operate their liquor license responsibly in the past, and we see no reason to deny the application, so we are recommending approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. I'll turn back to Councillor Garnett. Thank you.
I'll move recommendation 1, that council, having considered the location, person capacity, and hours of liquor service of the establishment, recommend to the LCRB that an amendment to permanently expand the areas of licensed liquor service permitted under the liquor primary license for the Mary Windspears Center at 2243 Beacon Avenue be approved on the basis that the application is generally consistent with Town of Sydney Liquor and Cannabis Licensing Policy number DB/015. 2, that council's comments on the prescribed LCRB considerations are as follows. Regarding A, the impact of noise on nearby residents, subsection I, it is in the opinion of council that the approval of the license would result in noise levels that are acceptable and consistent with the area's location as a venue and event center for the community in Saanich Peninsula. B, the impact on the community if the application is approved, subsection I, the view of the Town of Sydney is that although there might be some negative impacts, on balance, the general impact of the proposed expansion of areas for licensed liquor service to be either minimal or generally positive. 3, the views of residents and a description of the method used to gather views. A, no written submissions from the community received as of March 22nd, 2022 regarding this application. B, that staff forward the report dated March 22nd, 2022 regarding this application, which includes information on the public consultation process, to the LCRB as additional information, including a summary of any responses provided in person at the March 28th, 2022 council meeting.
Second.
Thank you, Councillor. Moved and seconded. Councillor Garnett, you wish to? Okay. Councillor Fallon? Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you, and we'll now turn to 13B, the second liquor license amendment application number LA 508 for 9829 3rd Street, Beacon Brewing, to extend hours of service between 11:30 a.m. to 11 p.m. daily. And I'll turn to staff for an introduction, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So following Council's resolution on this application, we did follow the same process for notifying the public and advertising in the newspapers. As of the agenda deadline, we received 11 comments from the public, and as you noted earlier in the meeting, a following 11 were received after that time for a total of 22. Public feedback on this application was much more evenly split, trending a little in favor of those concerned about the time change for the business. Staff's perspective on this is that this is a business that is operating in the right location for this type of use in a commercially zoned area. It is a mixed-use area with residents as well, but it is not solely a residential area, so this is the right place for this type of use. The hours staff do not believe are unreasonable. 11 o'clock is getting late, but for a commercial downtown area, seems to be a reasonable time frame. Later than that, into the wee hours of the morning might raise some concern, but given the circumstances in this case, staff are recommending approval as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. So we do have a recommendation.
I'll move the recommendation that council, having considered the location, person capacity, and hours of liquor services of the establishment, recommended to the LCRB that an amendment to the hours of operation for the existing liquor manufacturer license with lounge area endorsement for Beacon Brewing Limited at 9829 3rd Street be approved on the basis of the application, on the basis that the application is generally consistent with Town of Sydney Liquor and Cannabis Licensing Policy number DV-015. 2, that council's comments on the prescribed LCRB considerations are as follows regarding A, the impact of noise on nearby residents. It is the opinion of council that the approval of the license would result in noise levels that are acceptable and consistent with the area's zoning designation as a commercial center for the community in the Saanich Peninsula. And B, that the impact of the community on the community if the application is approved. The view of the Town of Sydney is that although there might be some negative impacts on balance, the general impact of the proposed liquor license hours of operation amendment be either minimal or generally positive. C, the views of residents and a description of the method used to gather views. Council acknowledges that the views of the residents regarding the proposal are mixed but generally positive, and the concerns raised can be addressed by the applicant, and that staff forward the report dated March 22nd, 2022 regarding this application, which includes the information on the public consultation process and comments related to the submissions received during the process to the LCRB as additional information, including a summary of any responses provided in person at the March 28, 2022 council meeting.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? Councillor Fallon.
Just further to staff's comments, that the letters that we got in were, yes, definitely pretty well 50-50 split. And the ones who were opposed were those that were living close to the building and saying that this was a residential, not a commercial. And I think they err on that assumption. It is within the first block off of Beacon Avenue. They're right in the center of Sydney. And interestingly, as an aside, sort of watching some of the social media comments in general about Sydney, and I noticed that there's a lot of people who are looking to move to Sydney, which I'm really quite thrilled to see. But one of the comments, this is not related to this, but it's about our community, is that you know, Sydney rolls up its sidewalks at 4:30 and 5 o'clock, and here we have a business who is clearly trying to look at staying open later, and they firmly believe that the clients are going to be there, because I don't imagine that they would want to pay for salaries for their wages for their employees and not expect any customers to be. So I see this as good news, and I look forward to this happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Follett. I'll turn to the seconder.
Thank
And then
you.
to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'll support this. I had concerns with Small Gods Brewery in terms of the outdoor patio. This doesn't have one. It's similar hours to what we granted them in their operation, so I don't see no reason not to approve it. And as far as any concerns that might come from noise, if that becomes an issue, I know staff will deal with it through their enforcement. So, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to clarify this through staff previously, but we moved the motion quite quickly. And so if I could, picking up on Councillor Garnett's comment that these are similar hours to Small Gods Brewing in the same building, can staff clarify, are these similar hours or are these exactly the same?
Through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul, Small Gods liquor license application was brought forward with 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. Hours daily. So I believe that's the same as what's being proposed here. I haven't seen the final liquor license, but that is what they applied for, yes.
Thank you. And so, yeah, similar as Councillor Garnett noted, I sympathize with, residents living directly above, a facility such as this. Having said that, we've previously seen this application similar and provided comment to LCRB on the hours that Mr. Newcomb just described at Small Gods Brewing. So it would be a real challenge for me, not to support the request that's before us now. So I will support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I am in support of this motion as well. And briefly, just to add one more thing to my colleagues, just to help explain why I still feel comfortable supporting this motion, despite some of the residents above having misgivings, is that the applicant was clear they did not intend to use this every night and actually having activities till 11 p.m., but they wanted to have the ability to book certain things some of those nights. And in particular, I don't feel Sunday night is normally a big party night for a lot of people. If they're going to have what they've given as examples of trivia nights and things, they're going to be probably relatively tamer nights, because that's usually a work night for most people. So I understand why they would have misgivings, but in this circumstance, I think this is fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Mr. Newcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's been pointed out to me that I did just misspeak. Small Gods hours were 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. However, Beacon Brewing is applying for 11:30 a.m. to 11 p.m.
Thanks for that clarification, Mr. Newcomb. Seeing no other speakers, I have a question to staff and then a comment. My question is that in the last part of the resolution, it says, and it's a long sentence, public consultation process, comments related to the submissions received during the process to the LCRB as additional information, including a summary of any responses provided in person at the March 28th, 22 council meeting. So we did have somebody in person, but we also had 22 items of correspondence. Do you provide to LCRB just your staff report that has been presented to council? Or do you provide a different summary or the actual correspondence to LCRB?
We provide the staff report, all the responses, and then we send a link of the council meeting if there are speakers in person for the LCRB to consider those as well.
Thank you. And I'm grateful that that's the process. My comment is, I won't repeat, I'm in support of the motion. But that a couple of the letter writers were opposed based on noise. They live either in upper stories in concern with noise. And one of the things that's noted is today's construction techniques are able to mitigate, noise from a lower level commercial business to upper levels. We know that right across the street, the Star Cinema will be showing movies with a significant sound system and condos immediately above. And so some of the corresponders indicated that they have a concern over the construction noise that is currently going on, and I will agree that it is unfortunate that residents have moved into the upper stories and that there is still construction going on in the commercial area, and I can appreciate that, but that construction will come to an end, and I don't think is a consideration for this. But with regards to noise, I did speak with one of the corresponders and indicated that asked if they had corresponded with the tenants with regards to their amplified music, because I think that it's an appropriate use in an appropriate place, and that there are measures either through reporting to the town or directly to the tenant that these issues can be mitigated. So I just wanted to comment on that. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? I see none opposed. That motion carries unanimous. And we'll now turn to 13C, and that is the renewal of subleases on Beacon Wharf. And I'll turn to Mr. Humble for an introduction, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So at the conclusion of the Beacon Wharf project consultation, Council instructed staff to negotiate extensions to the existing commercial subleases on Beacon Wharf and that they were to end at the end of 2024. So in considering the lease extensions, staff took it upon themselves to review the 10-year history associated with both of the subleases. Staff also determined that it was appropriate and necessary to undertake a bit of a comparative analysis of commercial lease rates in downtown Sydney with respect to what the current lease rates were for both of the subtenants. So in terms of completing the latter, staff utilized the services of a commercial real estate firm to conduct this analysis. As noted in the staff report, the 10-year history of both subleases clearly illustrates that there was certainly an effort being made to bring both subleases closer to market rents in 2017. The last rent increase for both subtenants occurred in 2017 and basically has remained the same for the past 5 years. Furthermore, the analysis undertaken by the commercial real estate firm illustrates the monthly rent per square foot currently being paid by both subtenants does not equate to current market commercial lease rents within the downtown. Accordingly, staff initiated a meeting with both of the subtenants. We met with them and had a discussion and came to an agreement with respect to what is deemed to be a fair and appropriate rent structure over the next 2 years and 9 months that would take us to the end of 2024 for the lease renewal. So attached for council's review are the proposed revised subleases. And I just want to indicate that as reflected in the staff recommendation, a notice must be published in the local newspaper regarding the proposed subleases prior to their approval or execution. It should be clarified that as long as there are no significant concerns raised through that notice provision, the subleases can then be executed without having to further come back to council for their review and consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. I'll turn to council if there are any questions of the report. I'll first turn to Councillor Renewal.
Thank you, Mayor. Through to staff, if I may, for starters, Mr. Humble, can you just clarify the lease for Pure Bistro Restaurant? I recall from the discussions with respect to the future Beacon Wharf, the bistro was represented by Ms. Donna May. I see a corporation name on here, Alpine Marine Center. Is Donna May representing Alpine Marine Corporation, or who is the actual client?
The actual subtenant is Alpine Marine. So it's Alpine
Sorry,
Marine.
I don't know if your microphone's on.
Sorry, the actual subtenant is Alpine Marine, and that's who staff met with.
in the person of Ms. May.
No. It's not.
I see. Okay. So she's, her capacity as manager then, I take it, of the restaurant.
That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you. Next comment then, perhaps a question. You met with representative from Satellite Fish Market, and you noted in your report that they were, I believe my takeaway was that they were receptive to what's being proposed here with respect to the increase. Is that correct?
Through the mayor to Councillor Renewal, that's correct.
Okay. I was surprised at the amount of the increase. I appreciate the staff went out and did an assessment of commercial space in Sydney. I see it with Pure Bistro, with Satellite Fish Market, a town-owned structure, which I think we've acknowledged through previous processes is probably in need of some repair. I'm surprised at the percentage increase, at least. I don't know that I have an appetite to recommend an alteration if the tenant is satisfied with this, but I would have thought consistency, perhaps at the $13.50 a square feet through the term, the duration of the lease might have been more reasonable. Alternatively, even the increase to $12 per square foot, and given the structure that we're referring to, might have been more reasonable. I get that it's a location that draws a lot of visitors, but the amount of the increase did surprise me. That's it for my comments, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Renewal. Further discussion? Or further questions, I'm sorry. Councillor O'Keefe. Sorry, we don't have a motion on the floor. We're at questions from Mr. Humble's report. Seeing no further questions, we do have a motion, a recommendation. Two parts to the recommendation.
I'll move the recommendation that that the sublease with Satellite Fish Company Limited for use of Beacon Wharf Area A, the fish market for the term April 1st, 2022 to December 31st, 2024, be approved subject to the required notice being published in the newspaper.
Councillor Fallon, if I could separate them.
Okay.
Just because they're different leases. Thank you. So we have the first one on the floor.
Second.
Second, we have moved and seconded. Any further discussion or any discussion now? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'll just say thank you for staff for bringing this forward. I think it's we're doing our due diligence at making sure that the rents being charged are appropriate. Yes, it's an aging structure, but I guess what I would point out is that the town has invested, I believe, hundreds of thousands of dollars over the last several years in order for that structure to be maintained. And so both the restaurants have benefited from those investments. So I think that the rent increases are reasonable, and I'll support the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, similar to Councillor O'Keefe, I want to put my appreciation to staff for the process. The fact that we looked into an outside entity to look into it and then actually approached the tenants before we even move forward. I think it was done very well. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? None opposed. That carries unanimous. Thank you. Councillor Fallon.
The second recommendation is that the sublease with Alpine Marine Centre Limited for use of Beacon Wharf Area B, the Pier Bistro for the term April 1st, 2022 to December 31st, 2024 be approved subject to a notice being published in the newspaper.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to make an observation for the public generally. If these leases are approved, which council has just done, but it's subject to the notice in the paper, that action will in fact confirm the status quo for Beacon Wharf till at least 2025. So that's a pretty key message to get out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. So we'll turn to item 13D now, which is the Beacon Avenue West Roundabout Project, and we have a report, and I'll turn to Mr. Hissick for an introduction, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is related to the earlier reference to the MOU being approved, and also the town's media release to the same subject last week. So there has been an agreement with Victoria Airport Authority and the District of North Saanich on building a roundabout at the intersection of Beacon and Galaran Road. And Sterling Way will also be realigned to connect to the roundabout. This infrastructure improvement will increase public safety, reduce congestion, and support economic development in the area. Beacon Avenue West and Sterling Way are both part of the town's road network. Essentially, this is a town road project, but we're lucky enough to have two funding partners to help pay for the improvements. And since all three parties to this memorandum of understanding benefit from past, current, and future development in the area, this partnership makes sense. The estimated cost for the project is roughly $4.9 million with a healthy contingency, and the project cost will be shared according to a formula agreed by the parties, whereby the town and the VAA each contribute 40%, while North Saanich will cover the remaining 20%. Estimated completion for the project is fall of next year. Additional details and public notifications will be brought forward as design proceeds and the construction nears. The primary purpose of reporting on this tonight is to add it to our financial plan and to discuss the town's funding for the project. So the VAA will be taking a leading role in managing the project from design through to completion, and those efforts on their behalf are contributions over and above their 40% share of the project. As far as the town's funding is concerned, rounding the project cost to $5 million would put our 40% roughly at $2 million. And while we have considerable borrowing capacity remaining, if council wishes to avoid borrowing, we could choose to fund our share through either or both of gas tax and internal borrowing through surplus. However, I do have some concerns that doing it that way would leave us short for future funding of other projects. So perhaps council would consider carrying through with borrowing for our $2 million or doing a mix of internal and borrowing financing. And should borrowing be selected, additional information on that process would be provided at a subsequent meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Hissick. I'll turn to council if there are questions. Councillor Wainwright, then Councillor O'Keefe.
Sorry, I don't have a question. It was for discussion.
Oh, certainly. Councillor O'Keefe, a question?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, through staff. Just want to confirm my understanding in regards to it being a one-lane versus a two-lane roundabout. I know we had some discussion about that. Just want to confirm my understanding that we will be pursuing the two-lane roundabout and that the funding that is proposed here would cover that two-lane roundabout?
That is our understanding. We've been looking to pursue the two-lane at this time to avoid having to go back to our funding partners in future to add that second lane.
Great. Thank you very much for that clarification.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff, do we have confirmation as of yet that the VAA and the District of North Saanich will be covering their costs?
North Saanich has confirmed, and VAA, while I was hoping for final confirmation in writing today, it's due to holidays, it wasn't received, but the last indication we received were that they were indeed going to fund their own portion up front.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Renewal.
Thank you, Mayor. Through to Mr. Hisek, I know you said if we chose to go the borrowing route for $2 million, there'd be some further information on that, but my assumption is the only avenue for that borrowing is Municipal Finance Authority. Is that correct?
We must do all our borrowing through the MFA, yes.
Okay. And we're seeing a climate of sort of rising rates. Do you realize currently in terms of MFA offerings if they've been fairly stable in this recent climate?
It does change every day. It goes up and down, and it's based on the most recent information.
So the assumption I'll take is that it will go up. So likely the sooner we were to pursue borrowing, if we're going that route, the better. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it would be better for us to borrow or
Sorry, Councillor Wainwright, if you would like to put the motion on the floor, we were just at questions.
Okay.
And I would like to separate them.
Right. So I'll start off with, I'll move that the Beacon West Roundabout project be added to the town's 2022-2026 financial plan, and that council prefer external borrowing for the town's share of the project.
Second.
Councillor Wainwright?
Okay, thank you. So with respect to the borrowing, we've had a lot of unforeseen things happen over the last couple of years, and with climate adaptation and knowing that we're going to be looking at increasing or doing some work on our storm drain infrastructure. Not sure if that's capacity upgrades or otherwise, but we clearly have a lot of things, capital projects to spend money on, and I don't like the idea of drawing down our sort of flexible in-house reserves. This is a project that I think the community very much would be behind. I think it is an appropriate kind of thing to borrow for, and that preserves our flexibility, particularly with things like the gas tax funding. I really don't like the idea of using that up on something like this.
Thank you, Councillor. Further discussion? Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, similar thought process. I was thinking sort of a long term and how valuable that money is for getting things done in our community, both from the gas tax perspective and the surplus that we use every year towards lowering taxes. And I certainly wouldn't want to put the next council in the position of not being able to do or act on the initiatives because we've left them a bit short in those funds. So I would prefer that, but I would also add that I would prefer that we go through the public assent process to do that. I'm not a fan of just borrowing assent free. I think the public should have some kind of input on how their money's spent. I do like the fact that we're pursuing the 2 lanes because, as anybody might remember, that's something I was pushing for from the very start. That to make it less expensive because we don't know what it would cost to go back, and also not to have to disrupt that neighborhood a second time. I think is pretty important. I think I'll leave my thoughts there, and thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Just a clarification of one of the points you raised in terms of public assent or not. That would be a decision for council at the time that staff brought the borrowing process forward.
That would be one of the key questions, yes.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we'll turn to 13E, which is the UBCM 2022 Asset Management Planning Grant, and I'll turn to staff for an introduction, please. Good evening, Ms. Clary.
Evening. This report outlines a grant application that the staff would like to make to UBCM Asset Management Planning Grant. The intent is that would be for the first year of the asset management plan. Through this year's financial plan, council did approve 3 years, so 2022, 2023, and 2024. So that would cover the work that was done in the first year, which is roads, asset management, and the asset management policy. we hope you support this grant application.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Seeing none, we do have recommendations. A recommendation.
I'll move that staff be authorized to apply for UBCM's 2022 Asset Management Planning Program funding for the development of an asset management policy and the road network asset management plan, and provide grant management if successful.
Second.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion, Councilor Enright?
Nope.
Okay. Any further discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we'll now turn to section 14, correspondence. We have two items. Oh, sorry. Oh, I did miss one. Thank you. I checked off the wrong one. And so we're at 13F, which is the Clean BC Municipal Top-Up Rebate Update. And I'll turn to Mr. Hissick for an update, please. Or the appropriate staff person.
Do you want it?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this report details the last year of the town's participation in the Clean BC Rebate Top-Up Program and how some of the funds that council allocated to that program were spent over that time period. I think in staff's opinion, it's we've been actually a bit surprised by the level of uptake, which is very positive. So overall, we believe it's been a positive program for the town, and we've seen a number of heating appliances switched over in this time. We are recommending that the agreement be extended out to the maximum date that the province allows for, until 2024. And Mr. Hissick has also suggested that the funding for the program be switched to the Climate Action Reserve Fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. Are there any questions for staff? Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff, looking at how much is offered in the program, and I understand the rationale behind wanting to spread it out to get to more homes, but I wonder, and the uptake is pretty good. I'm wondering, does staff think that there would be a greater uptake if the amounts were greater, if there's that potentiality?
Through the mayor to Councillor Garnett, I really can't say.
Yeah.
I would assume so, but to be honest, I'm not sure of the particular motivations and circumstances behind why people choose to do this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm just trying to, as Councillor O'Keefe would say, percolate on whether or not, with $38,000 left after 1 year and on this pace, if we could move things faster. But I mean, I guess if staff's satisfied that's working in the trajectory they like, then we'll just, I'm okay. I'm comfortable with leaving it as it is. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. So we do have a recommendation.
I'll move the recommendation that the municipal contribution agreement for the Clean BC Better Homes Rebate Program be extended until March 31st, 2024, with the town's contribution coming from the Climate Action Reserve.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We'll now turn to correspondence, and first item is a letter from the District of Saanich regarding an update on the Motor Vehicle Act pilot project, and we have a recommendation.
Move receipt.
Second.
Any discussion? Questions of staff? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. And item 14B, Economic Development Strategy, Current Situation Assessment. I'll turn to, well, sorry, did you want to do an introduction, Mr. Humble, or we do have a recommendation?
No, I'm good without an introduction. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So we have the information in our package, and we have a recommendation. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'll move the motion that we refer this to EAC for their review and comment.
Second.
We haven't moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councillor O'Keefe and Councillor Garnett.
Thank you. A question through you, Mr. Mayor, through to staff. In looking at the report, in the sections of, I think it's on pages 27 and 28, and they're talking about the inventory of our businesses. And there's, the data there is from 2017. Lists the number and type businesses and Harbor Road, the industrial area, downtown, et cetera. And I'm wondering why we aren't seeing more current information than 2000. That's information that's 5 years old. I know that the town was working on a list along with the business development manager to get a more current picture of our business profile. So I'm wondering if we can anticipate some more recent information.
Mr. Humble?
Through the Mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. So it's a good question. We could certainly follow up with the consultant and ask the question, but I don't have a response in terms of why that particular subset of information was used.
No, thanks for the
Okay.
question, and thank you, Mr. Humble.
Okay. And so, yeah, so my feedback would be that to the consultant, that I would like to see more recent information. I believe it's there. So does staff require a motion for us for them to take that back to the consultant, or is this just sufficient that we've mentioned it?
Motion's not necessary, Mr. Mayor. We can just pass that along to the consultant.
Yeah, I think that can be passed to the consultant, and then when it goes to EAC, there may be more information.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, it's important to note too that this is an interim report.
Mhm.
It's based on a current situation assessment, and the next step in the process is actually organizing focus groups with businesses, and part of the intent of that focus group is to have the consultant walk through the current assessment report and ask the question, did we get it right? You know, so they'll get feedback through the businesses as well regarding this particular report.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe, Councillor Garnett, and Councillor Rentoul.
Thank you, Mayor. Through your staff, just to be a stickler for details, but it's to make it more accurate, on page 10, they list it as Beacon Street, and it should be Beacon Avenue. It's maybe something to mention to him.
Yeah, we'll mention it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rentoul.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I found this to be very interesting. I'm pleased that we'll look for comment from the EAC on this report. I did find it interesting on page 27, the references to West Sydney and the types of business operations there, which include wholesale, real estate, education, professional services, etc. So it does seem like West Sydney is home to much more than just its industrial base. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further discussion on the motion on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we'll turn to section 15, correspondence for information.
Move receipt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? And motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We have no notices of motion. We do have a motion to go in camera.
I'll move that it is in the opinion of council that the public interest requires that persons other than members of the council and officers be excluded from the meeting to consider confidential matters respecting negotiations between the local government and a provincial government or federal government or both pursuant to section 90.2B of the community charter, and that council continue the meeting in closed session.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, staff. Thank you, council. We'll adjourn till 8:20 and then return